When you think about a massive cover-up, what's the first thing that pops into your head? My guess is it's something like shredded documents, secret meetings in dark, smoky rooms, a desperate attempt to keep everyone quiet. It's the kind of thing you see in the movies. But what we're going to explore today is something totally different. Turns out, the biggest, most damaging lies in history weren't built on silence at all. They were built on something way more clever and way more sinister.
So let's get right into it. We're not just going to look at a few old scandals. Nope. We're going to actually dissect the systems, the blueprints, really, that allow these gigantic lies to be built and maintained, sometimes for decades, right out in the open. And that really brings us to the big question here. How do these things actually work? I mean, what's the blueprint that allows an entire industry or a huge corporation or even a government to hide a devastating truth from literally everyone?
Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. It's definitely not about keeping things quiet. In fact, if you think about it, complete silence can actually make people suspicious, right? The real masters of this game, they understood that. The goal was never to get rid of information. They rely on noise. And this is the absolute key. Instead of silence, you create a storm, a blizzard of conflicting reports, of sponsored research, of plausible deniability. You just generate so much noise that the actual, simple truth gets completely drowned out in all the static.
Okay, so to really get how this noise is made, we need a framework. You can think of it like an architectural plan for building a lie. And it turns out there are these recurring patterns, these specific pillars that hold the entire deceptive structure up. And here they are, the 3 pillars of deception. First up, you have delay. The whole point here is to manufacture just enough uncertainty to kick the can down the road and avoid doing anything. Second, diffusion. This is where you spread the blame around so much that no single person or group can ever be held accountable. And third, normalization. This one is really insidious. It's where you start to reframe something awful as just, the cost of doing business. Keep these 3 in your head because we're going to see them in action. And this is a really crucial strategic shift. See, the goal isn't to make everyone believe a lie. That's actually pretty hard to do. The real goal is much simpler. It's to keep the public arguing. You just have to frame the truth as one controversial theory out of many. Do that, and you prevent the consensus you'd need to actually take action. All right, so let's put this whole framework to the test. We're going to walk through 3 major historical examples. Each one is a total masterclass in deception, and each one perfectly shows off one of those 3 pillars we just talked about. So we're going to start with the tobacco industry. For decades, they absolutely knew their product was killing people. But they pulled off a brilliant strategy of strategic delay, which kept the whole world debating the science while their profits just kept rolling in. I mean, look at this. This quote comes from an actual internal memo from a tobacco company. Doubt is our product. It's got to be one of the most chillingly honest things ever written down in a corporate office. Their business wasn't just selling cigarettes. It was manufacturing the doubt that allowed them to keep selling cigarettes. That was the real product. And they were so systematic about it. They didn't just deny the science. They created their own fake scientific universe with their own research institutes pumping out studies. They ran ads with doctors smiling and holding a cigarette. And their legal strategy was just to demand an impossible standard of proof, which they knew would keep the debate going forever. It was a perfect textbook execution of delay. Okay, for our next case, we're shifting gears from delay to normalization. Here, the terrible truth wasn't hidden by manufacturing and debate. No, it was accepted, it was calculated, it was treated as just a routine business expense. This is the story of the Ford Pinto. $11. That's the number at the very heart of this entire scandal. Internal documents from Ford showed this was the estimated cost per car to install a simple little part that would have made the Pinto's fuel tank way safer in a crash. Just $11. And this is the memo that explains why they didn't spend it. It's just cold calculation. Ford's own analysts literally put a price tag on a human life, $200,000. They figured that paying out for the deaths and injuries they expected would cost them about $49.5 million. But fixing all the cars, that would be $137 million. The conclusion was purely economic. It was cheaper to just let people die. This is normalization in its most brutal, naked form.
So, for our final case, we're going to scale up from corporate deception to a state sponsored lie, and we're moving from normalization to that third pillar, diffusion. This is the story of a horrific war crime and the 50-year lie that was built to blame someone else entirely.
Just look at this timeline. It's wild. In 1940, the Soviet secret police execute 22,000 Polish officers. When the bodies are discovered 3 years later, the Soviets immediately launch this huge propaganda campaign to diffuse the blame, pointing the fingers straight at Nazi Germany. And for almost half a century, through sheer force and endless propaganda, they stuck to that story. It was an active, massive, state-level effort to shift accountability. So, what do we take away from these three very different blueprints for deceit? I mean, what's the common thread that runs through a corporate doubt campaign, a cold-hearted cost-benefit analysis, and a massive state-sponsored lie? Well, the common thread is always the deliberate suppression of truth for some kind of gain, whether that's profit or power or just political survival. And in every single case, the truth didn't just pop out one day. It was a slow, difficult fight, led by whistleblowers and journalists and people who just refused to let the noise win. And the cost? Well, it was staggering, both in human lives and in the trust we have in our institutions.
And don't for a second think this stuff is just ancient history. This architecture of deception, this playbook, is still very much in use. Today's cover-ups just look a little different. They might use a flood of data to confuse people instead of an outright denial. Or they'll hide behind so much complexity that nobody can figure out what's going on. But the core principles, delay, diffusion, and normalization, they're exactly the same. So the crucial question for all of us is, how do we spot these patterns in the world around us right now? The next time you see a debate that seems to go on forever with no resolution, or a crisis where no one seems to be in charge, you can now ask yourself, is this real or is it engineered? Is this a genuine search for truth, or is it a deliberate attempt to prevent certainty? And I just want to leave you with this one last thought. The most sophisticated and the most dangerous lies, they don't try to force you to believe something false. They're much more subtle. They're the ones that whisper, oh, the science isn't settled yet, or it's just more complicated than that, or we just need more time. They tell you it's simply too soon to know. And as history shows us again and again, by the time we're finally certain, the price has already been paid.